Hey folks, welcome to the show. Uh, when it came to all doing a video for all the awards, I was kind of going to do them in the order that they were released, and then I saw the Selke nominations and I said that I need to talk about them. In my Vesna video, you'll see that I only talked about 5 goalies, the 3 that were nominated and 2 that I felt could have been in there. Well, this is a lot more than 3 players that I've put in here. There's 19 here, and I would have done 20, except it didn't fit on the screen because there's lots I wanted to talk about the Selke nominations because, frankly, I wasn't happy with them. There's one I don't mind. I understand the other 2. It's just I think there's a lot better choices based on my own personal criteria, which I'd like to hear yours as well. While that's on my mind, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. I really would. And it's not just for engagement. I actually enjoy it and I appreciate it. But speaking of engagement and making me feel better, I'd hope you leave a like on the video if you think I earn it. And even better, you can subscribe and turn on notifications. It's all a huge help to me. I put a lot of time into these videos. I know it doesn't have the same editing abilities as others, but I do a ton of research. And hopefully get all these videos out in one go. I try to do it all in one take because it really cuts down on the time, meaning I have more time for actually living my life because this doesn't make money yet. Hopefully it does at some point and all that kind of stuff, and more time for research because I like researching and I like sharing it with people. And it's because of my research of defensive forwards this year I was quite disappointed with the nominations. Again, I don't mind one of them. I really don't. It's just anyways, so the way I've got it sorted out here is you can't see the numbers. Maybe you're on a phone. I'm sorry, but I will talk about the important numbers. You can still probably see all the blue and the red, which is important. The deeper the blue, the better the stat compared to the rest. Deeper the red, the worse the stat compared to the rest. What I've gathered here I'll move my cursor as you can see, is I've sorted the players. And this is a spoiler alert, I've sorted the players and who I think should win the Selke. And so you'll notice that the 3 guys nominated, being Alexander Barkov, Jordan Staal, and Austin Matthews, only one of them are in the top. Let me double check for that. Yeah, only one of them are in my top 10. I really didn't like the nominations. I really didn't. I understood the other 2. So the stats I got here, because look, I didn't watch Jordan Staal play all 82 games. I didn't watch Austin Matthews. Or did Jordan Staal play all? Yeah, he played 80 games. I didn't watch all of Jordan Stahl's 80 games. I didn't watch all of Barkov's 73 games, and I didn't watch all of Matthews' 81 games. But I still watch hockey. I still watch them here and there, and I understand numbers. I understand stats, and I try to dig into it as much as I can. And for the past year, I've been digging into defensive stats as much as I can because it's harder to measure. It's much harder to measure because with points, it's just like, did the puck go in the net? Yes. Good at offense. End of story. Defense is not that because goalies are on the mix and all that kind of stuff. So for the stats I gathered, I did put games played in points just because I think it's interesting, but it doesn't really matter much for the Selke. Next is plus minus, which, yes, is an overused stat, over-relied upon stat, shouldn't be relied upon now that we have lots of other stats. But I think when a player's plus minus is well past 25, it is worth noting. Next is average time on ice. Not always important. It is not an indicator of somebody's offensive abilities, but it is an indicator that the more time they get, the more their coach trusts them over other players they have. Next is shorthanded time on ice. This is a similar vein where just because you don't have shorthanded time on ice, Austin Matthews, doesn't mean you're bad on defense. It just means the coach decided your defense wasn't good enough to trust you with a lot of these minutes, or felt guys were frankly better. It is true. For example, Connor McDavid is an example. He is good on defense. You can watch him. You can see he backtracks. You can look at the numbers. He had over 100 hits. He had a lot of takeaways during the year, and his analytics were amazing. But he didn't get shorthand time on ice because the Oilers have Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Ryan McLeod, Derek Ryan, so 3 Ryans. There's also Sam Carrick and Adam Henrique. Jan Mark, even Connor Brown are all pretty good penalty killers, especially McLeod and Nugent Hopkins. They're very good penalty killers, so you don't need to waste McDavid's energy on penalty kill. You can save his energy for what he's really good at because you can afford to put Nugent Hopkins there instead or McLeod, right? So who both had a ton of takeaways as well. I wanted to put McLeod in here, but I didn't. I had to cut it down because I wanted to talk about him, and I found a way too. Anyways, but I do think my personal criteria is that for a player to win the Selke, they have to be used on the penalty kill a lot. And by a lot, I like to say 90 seconds a game. Maybe I could make an exception for just 1 minute a game, but I want to say at least 90 seconds a game. And if they're playing at least 2 minutes shorthanded a game, especially for forwards, that's when I say, okay, that's great. That's awesome. Next is Fenwick 4 percentage, which is a measure of how well your team controls the shots while you're on the ice. This is a good metric to see defense usually, but it's important to take into account their situations, which skipping over relative Fenwick 4, which is just how their Fenwick 4 percentage looks compared to the rest of the team, is defensive zone start percentage. So if a player has really bad Fenwick 4 percentage, it is forgivable if they start a ton of their shifts in the defensive zone. One of the guys on this list is True. That reminds me, it's important to note all these colors here and numbers are in relation to just forwards. So, for example, Evans, who's number 14 here, he'll be number 15 on here because number 1 is the player team statistics all at the top. So he's the 14th player on the list here. He led the league in shorthanded time by four, not in the league because there are some defensemen that beat him there. So that's just what these numbers are relative to, or the colors, I should say. So it is. I think defensive zone start percentage is an important note. It is also important to note that not all the good defensive players are going to have high defensive zone start times because their offense is really good too. So they're going to get started in the offense as well. Hits aren't as much of a good defensive metric as they used to be, but I think it is considered more of a bonus. My opinion is you do not need to be a good hitter to be a great defensive forward, but it is a nice bonus. Blocks, again, aren't a perfect defensive stat either, but I like them, especially as a goalie. I appreciate it when the guys make a block in front of me. There's less room I have to cover, and hurts them more than it hurts me, so it works out. Again, doesn't mean everything, but it is a really nice stat, and it's a stat that forwards don't usually get a lot of blocks in, but we have seen some high numbers in blocking from some guys here. Next is takeaways. I don't usually look at giveaways because those are so finicky, and takeaways can be too, but I still think it's a pretty good stat. If tracked perfectly, which we'll assume they are, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're not. It's a great defensive stat. What's the best thing you could do on defense? Take the puck away from the other team. So there's that. Face-off wins and face-off win percentage is an important stat. It's a reason. There's a reason. A lot of Selke winners are centers. One, because centers are usually deployed in a defensive situation more than wingers. But two, because face-offs can lead to goals. A face-off win in the offensive zone can lead to a goal. So the flip side is you better win the face-off in the defensive zone, or else you're giving the team a really good chance. If you win it in your own zone, then great. You get to skip all the rest of the stuff you do. You don't need to hit anybody. You don't need to block. You don't need to get a takeaway. You have the puck. So it is an important stat, but I don't punish wingers for not having face-off. So that's why there are a few players who have their numbers in the face-off area are white, because I wasn't going to make him red, because it's not, for example, Mitch Marner's fault that he didn't get face-offs, but it is, I would consider it a bonus for players who can not only win face-offs, but win them a lot. Okay, so How do I want to do this? Let's talk. Let's start from. I don't know if I want to cover every player. I know I'm not going to cover every number because there's a lot here. Yeah, we'll start with. I definitely want to cover the top 10. Sure, I'll probably cover every player. Some shorter than others. So, in my opinion, well, maybe we should cover the nominees first. Yeah, let's do the nominees first. So Barkov was nominated, and he is the highest ranked by me. Of course, it's all my own opinion, and I know my opinion isn't supreme, but I like to think it's pretty close. Again, let me know yours down below. So I had Barkov as the third best defensive forward that I threw on this list. There are some forwards that I didn't include that could have been in the top 20, but I didn't want to exclude Matthews. And I'll get to Matthews because I think he is great defensively. But I talked about shorthanded time on ice, which he doesn't have much of. But we'll get to him. So Barkov had a great defensive year, as he always does. He's definitely a darling by Selke voters, as proven by the fact that he's quite often nominated. And if you think, well, he's just getting nominated by name brand, one, yeah, probably. And two, he's established that name brand because he is very good defensively, and he had another good defensive year. He was a plus 33, played nearly 20 minutes a night, in which his analytics were fantastic. He had a 58 Fenwick 4 percentage, which is good for a plus 5.5 relative, which are both great numbers. Most of his starts were in the offensive zone, but he still had quite a few defensive zone starts. He won a ton of face-offs. He won 630 face-offs for 57.3% face-off win percentage. He also hit quite a bit, even though it is a red number. It's just because the guy who led in hits had like 326. It was Garnet Hathaway. So even though 104 hits by Alexander Barkov is pretty good, it just looks really bad in compared to Garnet Hathaway. So that's why it's red. He had 50 blocks, which is good for a forward, and 61 takeaways, which is very good as well. But I had two guys in front of him. Let's talk about them now. Adam Lowry was the guy who I had number one. He was a plus 17 with the Winnipeg Jets. He didn't have a lot of time on ice, 16 minutes and 6 seconds, but a lot of it was in the defensive zone. He started at almost 2/3 of his starts in the defensive zone, and he also was on the penalty killing unit for 2 minutes and 6 seconds a game. He had a ton of hits, 181, a lot of blocks, 65. Not a lot of takeaways, but 38 isn't bad. He was okay in the face-off circle, pretty average there. I don't think he really had a bad number at all when it came to defensive scenarios, and that's why I put him as number one, because there wasn't really a weakness in his defensive game, except maybe takeaways. But again, 38's not bad. It's just not super high, or it's not high really, but it's not bad. And he didn't play a lot of time on ice either. I'd like to see more than just 60 minutes and 6 seconds from a Selke winner, but it's still a really good number. It's still in the blue. I just felt he was the most complete defensive forward. And, of course, more of his story has to do with being a captain for the Jets. But that doesn't really matter for the Selke. So he is my number one pick. And when a voter gets to vote, he gets top five. So actually, before we get to Stahl and Matthews, let's finish out with top five. So Barkov would have been my third. So I get it. That's why he's the guy I don't mind as a nomination, because he would have been my third pick. Second pick, though, was Swede, Mikael Backlund for the Calgary Flames. -4 isn't a great number, but he was playing in defensive scenarios on a Calgary Flames team that didn't have a lot more goals than goals against, so his -4 is quite forgivable, which is why it's not a stat used a lot, because so much goes into pluses and minuses. You can also say, okay, well, his analytics, 53.7 Fenwick 4 percentage is pretty good, which is good for a plus 2.8 relative. So those are pretty good numbers. They're especially good when you realize 62.5% of his defensive zone starts. 62.5% of his zone starts were in the defensive zone. So if a guy is starting over half of his starts in defensive zone, I'd say it's forgivable for a guy Fenwick 4 to be below 50. If he's starting over 60% of his shifts in the defensive zone. This doesn't include on the fly shifts, but just sidebar there. But anyways, at his number, at 62.5%, I'd say it's totally forgivable for Backlund's Fenwick 4 percentage to be below 50. And like Adam Lowry's, it's not. It's still high. So that is a testament to how often Calgary will get the puck in the defensive zone when he starts in that shift, whether it's from a face-off win, which he won quite a few, or from a takeaway in which he had 61, or from other things, and which included his play. So he was my second pick. And then it was Barkov. And then after Barkov was another Florida Panther who at times during the year I thought was better defensively. It's Sam Reinhart. He was a plus 29. Amazing analytics, just like Barkov, but not quite as good. Not quite as many defensive zone starts. He played 40 more seconds than Barkov overall, including 9 more on the penalty kill. I think part of that had to do with his ability to get the puck and score. Hey, if it works, it works. It's kind of an 80s style of penalty killing. He was not a great face-off taker, which is ultimately what made me put him below Barkov, though he did have 66 blocks, which is really good for a forward. Fifth, would have rounded out my voter card if I got to vote, is a bright spot on a team that went through a lot of crap this year. It's Jason Dickinson and the Chicago Blackhawks. So the Chicago Blackhawks, got outscored a ton. That's no secret. So you'd expect a lot of their players to be minuses. Connor Bedard was a minus 44, which some people use as an insult. Yeah, it's pretty bad, but considering the team he was on and the fact that he was always playing against our competition as a rookie, it's forgivable. So if a player managed to be a plus on that team, that's pretty dang good. And Jason Dickinson was. He was a plus 4 on that Chicago Blackhawks team. He played 16 and a half minutes a night. Just over 2 minutes of that was shorthanded. And he did start 61% of his shifts, not including on-the-fly shifts, in the defensive zone. His 46.3 Fenwick 4 percentage is not good, but considering it was the Blackhawks, it was good enough to have a plus 4.1 relative Fenwick 4. He had 143 hits, pretty good. 73 blocks, really good for a forward. And 54 takeaways, which is pretty good. He was also 50% in the faceoff circle, winning 618 faceoffs over the year. So that would have rounded out my top 5. Before I go over some of the other guys, actually, no, I will. I will go over some of the other guys really quickly until we get to Jordan Staal. So number 6 would have been Anthony Cirelli with the Lightning. He was one of their go-to penalty killers. He played 2 minutes and 20 seconds on the penalty kill. Lots of good underlying numbers. Often defensive zone situations he was employed. He had 75 blocks as probably the main highlight takeaway from him of the numbers I put here. And he also added 48 takeaways. After that is Nick Bjugstad. He's one of my favorite players to watch defensively, just because he's so big. I remember when he first came to the Oilers, I thought he was a defenseman. I thought he was Vincent Desharnais. I realized, he's a forward. He was a plus 11 on a team that didn't do so good, the Arizona Coyotes. He was one of their go-to penalty killers, and he was also the go-to guy in defensive zone situations, making his average Fenwick 4 pretty good. He was a good hitter, good blocker, not a lot of takeaways, and good in the face-off circle. Next is Charlie Coyle. I brought him up before how much I liked his defensive play this year. Obviously, he doesn't replace Patrice Bergeron, who was frankly a unicorn when it came to defensive play, but Coyle did really good in stepping up. I think he filled the shoes a lot better than a lot of people thought he would. He played 18 minutes a night, almost 2.5 minutes on the penalty kill per night. His analytics, Fenwick 4, are pretty bad, but forgivable since nearly 60% of his starts were in the defensive zone. He had 131 hits, 60 blocks, and 53 takeaways, while winning 762 faceoffs, good for 51.6%. After him was Mallenstein. So when I was talking about really ugly analytics being forgiven, this guy is the reason. He only played 14 minutes a night, and he's analytics of 39.9 Fenwick 4% is what brought him down, because that is a really ugly number. But then you get into the fact he was almost exclusively used in defensive zone situations. 90.5% of his shifts began in the defensive zone. Or, I mean, starts, I should say. There's a difference because there's on-the-fly shifts. I'm trying to correct myself as I go through this video. But yeah, 90.5% of his starts were in the defensive zone, pretty much making all of his analytics forgivable, even impressive at some point. And on a Washington Capitals team that really relied on its goaltending and defense, Malmsteen was one of the big reasons they could. Again, if they had the puck, he was probably on the bench. But if they needed to get the puck away from the opponents, he was usually on the ice. He had 241 hits, the most of any player on this list. 93 blocks, almost the most of any player on this list. 30 takeaways isn't great. He's the highest ranked winger I have, but he's immediately followed by one of the best wingers in the league, a guy I like quite a bit, and that is Mitch Marner. He isn't as high because he only played 69 games. I think it should be higher. If you want to win a Selke, you should play more than 70 games. Like, Barkov 73 is kind of pushing it for me, in my opinion. But Marner still had great defensive numbers. He didn't start a lot in the defensive zone, but that's because he is a great offensive talent too. But when he was there, it was usually really good. He had 59 takeaways, which is a little low for him, but still a really good number. And he had 51 blocks as well. He played he had a lot of ice time, managed to be a plus 21, and played 3 seconds past the 2-minute mark on shorthanded per night. Number 11 is a guy I hyped up and hoped would be a Selke nominee, but ultimately when I put the numbers together for this video, I couldn't put him in my top 10. That's Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. He has a lot of really great defensive plays this year. I hope a few guys put him as a 5th place vote, but I don't think he'll get too many. At least if it was up to me, I don't think he'd get too many. But I still loved his play, loved his defensive play. He had 61 takeaways, which is great. Not great in the face-off circle. He's usually used as a winger, but he could take face-offs when needed. He didn't have too much time on the ice, just shy of 20 minutes. That's still a lot, and just shy of 2 minutes on the penalty kill. So I loved his defensive game. It's just, when it comes to a Selke, it's not about could, it's would. And that's something I'll bring up with Matthews, because I think Matthews could be an amazing defensive center. But he didn't really get to prove it in all areas this year, and we'll get to him. And it's the same reason why I didn't put McDavid on here. There'd be a lot of blue on McDavid's defensive numbers. But he wasn't used as a penalty killer, and so he didn't really get to prove it. And that's the same thing why Nugent-Hopkins dropped. If he had more time on the penalty kill and maybe some more hits or blocks, I'd put him a lot higher. But he didn't. Next is Robert Thomas. He had the least amount of hits of anybody here, only 16. But that's quite forgivable because it wasn't his style. He got the puck his own way. He has 70 takeaways, and he won the face-offs a lot. He had won nearly 900 this year. 53.1 was his success rate in the face-off circle. He had really good analytics, especially for a Blues team, and also delivered on the penalty kill with 1 minute 48 seconds on the penalty kill. Next, now we get to Jordan Staal. So Jordan Staal is a great defensive forward. Don't get me wrong there, okay? He's great. I had to raise an eyebrow at him being a minus 14 on a Carolina Hurricanes team. I understand that when a defensive forward is used almost exclusively on defense like Jordan Staal was this year, your plus-minus is going to take a hit. It's going to look pretty bad. But it still kind of surprised me. And it is impressive that even though he started most of his starts in the defensive zone, he still managed to have a Fenwick 4 of 61, which is the highest of the guys here, which was good for a plus 3.7 relative because a lot of Carolina Hurricanes guys had really high Fenwick 4 percentages, and Staal, despite his defensive zone utilization, was no different. He had 2 minutes and 6 seconds penalty kill per night, 142 hits, great, 41 blocks, pretty solid, 25 takeaways, could be a little better, but not bad. He won a lot in the face-off circle, one shy of 800. which was good for winning 58.1% of the faceoffs he took. So no, yeah, he was a great defensive forward. I just felt like there was better, and though I don't mind him getting recognition, it's just again, I would have liked to have seen maybe better, uh, or more usage, maybe some more takeaways, I guess. In fact, now that I'm reading it, I do kind of want to raise him a few spots, but I still wouldn't raise him to my top 5. All these guys are pretty interchangeable, but I feel pretty good about my top 3. Yeah, and I feel really good about Reinhardt at number 4, but after that, it's pretty interchangeable. Anyways, next I had to include Evans. I want to say Jake Evans. Correct me if I'm wrong. With the Montreal Canadiens, used pretty exclusively in defensive scenarios. Well, I'm exaggerating a bit, but 67.9% of his starts were in the defensive zone. He also led the league in shorthanded time on ice by forward with 3 minutes and 10 seconds per game, which, in my opinion, makes his poor analytics quite forgivable. He had 86 hits, 65 blocks, and 27 takeaways. I really wanted to push him high because of his very high usage on the penalty kill and very high defensive zone start percentage. But I would have liked to have either seen more hits or, more importantly, takeaways, or just more usage kind of thing. And he was a good faceoff taker as well. Next is the last winger on here, and that's Alex Took with his hometown Buffalo Sabres. He was more of an offensive threat than he was defensively, but that doesn't mean he was bad defensively at all. He was 30 seconds shy of 20 minutes a night, 1 minute 37 seconds on the penalty kill per night for Took. Decent analytics, though again he was usually used in offensive scenarios, so it's not worth mentioning. The reason that really put him on here was his takeaways. He had 82 this year. That's almost, well, not almost in the league, but that is one of the better numbers in the league. He also had 82 blocks, which is also great for a forward. But if he had more penalty kill usage, defensive zone usage on 5-on-5, I'd probably put him higher. But he didn't, so whatever. Philip Deneau with the Kings. I was kind of surprised how low he ended up. But it was more usage related, and the fact he only had 22 takeaways. But he is still a great defensive forward. That's why he's on this list. That's why he's usually given tough assignments. And despite getting tough assignments, he managed to be a plus 12 with the LA Kings in his 18 minutes and 1 second per time on ice per game. I said that wrong, but you get what I meant, which included almost 2 minutes on the penalty kill. Phenomenal analytics. He was absolutely an analytics darling this year, and he won quite a few face-offs as well. The reason he's kind of lower is I would have liked to have seen more takeaways from him or more defensive usage, but it's still great defensive forward, and you can tell that from watching him. Another guy is Alex Kerfoot. This guy could have been a lot higher on here because of his heavy penalty kill usage, 2.5 minutes, or his 76 blocks. Those are both great numbers for a forward. But the minus 15, again, I know plus minus is kind of iffy, kind of hurts. And it also hurts that his Fenwick 4 percentage wasn't that good either. And his defensive zone usage on 5-on-5 doesn't really make up for it, in my opinion. And he wasn't a great faceoff taker either. But I felt with his penalty kill usage and his lots of blocks, he had to be noted here. Ryan Poehling with the Flyers. He was part of the reason the Flyers were great defensively this year. He didn't get a lot of usage, which is kind of what bumped him down here. He only played 15 minutes a night. But I had to include him because he led all forwards in the league in blocks. He was the only forward in the league to have over 100. He finished with 101 on the year. That's kind of the highlight for him here. And lastly is Austin Matthews. Now, he does have some blue here because, don't get me wrong, he's a great defensive forward. Absolutely. Sorry, I need some water. Plus 31, nearly 21 minutes on the ice. Phenomenal analytics, though part of that is inflated because the vast majority, well, not vast, but the majority of his starts were in the offensive zone. Only 40.8% of the starts were in the defensive zone. He had 90 hits, which is pretty good, 93 blocks, which is excellent, and 85 takeaways, also excellent. He was a good faceoff taker. I think he would launch into the top 3 if he was used more defensively, in my opinion. And I think there is a fair question to ask, why was Marner used for 2 minutes and 3 seconds by Sheldon Keefe and Matthews only 42 seconds on the penalty kill? And part of it is because, well, you don't want to sacrifice, you don't want to take away from Matthews' offensive game. Understandable. He is the best goal scorer in the league right now this year, and going forward probably too. But the thing is, I feel like you gotta prove it. Just because I think you can doesn't mean you will or you can. You gotta prove it, right? 42 seconds is an increase for him 42 shorthanded seconds is an increase for him, and I'd like to see it more increased for the sake of these Selke considerations. He was actually the reason I was most mad about Selke nominations, him and Stahl, and that's not me saying that they're bad defensively. No, Jordan Stahl was great defensively this year, and so was Austin Matthews. But to me, I think you have to have some penalty kill time. You have to be, your defense should be so good that your team has to use you on the penalty kill. Excuse me. And while Sheldon Keefe did use Matthews more on the penalty kill than he has in the past, he still didn't use him a lot. He still, he still used Mitch Marner more. Part of that is positional. Marner is a winger, Matthews is a center. But that is a question to be had. If Matthews' defense is so good, why is Marner being used more on the penalty kill? That is a question I have. And that's not me doubting Matthews. Like I've said 3 or 4 times, because I don't want people to get the wrong idea. I love Austin Matthews' game. I can hate the Leafs all I want. I don't hate the Leafs, but if I did hate, I hate them at some points. But I can hate them all I want, but I have to respect Austin Matthews' defensive game. In addition to being a great goal scorer, he's the only guy here who has 107 points, which, yes, points don't matter for the Selke nomination, but it is kind of a bonus that you're not only good enough to get the puck away from the team, but put it in the back of the net or help it end up in the back of the net. So I love his game. Okay, I'm not like mad, but I am mad, but I just feel like your defense, to be a Selke winner, your defense should be good enough where your team has to use you in the penalty kill, is kind of my thinking. And so that's why Jason Dickinson is higher. I think, if Matthews was used more defensively, I'm just using Jason Dickinson as a random example. But other guys here, if Matthews was used more in defensive scenarios, yeah, I do think he'd be higher. But at that point, why don't we just put McDavid in there as well? And maybe McKinnon, all these guys. But they're not being used in defensive scenarios, and Matthews wasn't used in defensive scenarios too often. And that's why he's quite low here. And I would have put him lower, but he wouldn't have fit on the screen, and I'd have to do a lot of scrolling. But yeah, if we're just looking at 5-on-5 play, I'd say, yeah, he's pretty dang high. I'd put him in top 10. But he was he was used on the penalty kill more than usual, but he didn't reach the minute mark. And I said at the beginning, I'd like to see 90 seconds, and he wasn't even halfway there. Close, though. So, again, I don't want anybody saying Matthews is a bad defensive player. No, he's great. He's great defensively. But we didn't really get to see him actually do that too much, as much as I think a Selke winner should. I will say, if he is used more in the penalty kill, which I hope he is, I think he'll break 100 blocks. He might be the guy who has 100 points and 100 blocks in a year. I'd certainly be very, very happy for him to do that, because I think that'd be really cool. So, again, I want to end positive. I love Matthews. I respect Jordan Stahl a ton. I respect his defensive game, and Barkov is absolutely a defensive legend. I just did not think those 3 should be the nominees. Again, I don't really mind Barkov there, but I'd like to see who else was voted for but not ultimately finished in the top 3, because I think Lowry had a great year defensively. I think so did Backlund. I think those two really need to be mentioned a lot. I can go without Dickinson being mentioned, or Sorelli, maybe even Reinhardt, but I hope Lowry and Backlund are voted for a lot with those fourth and fifth place votes. Anyways, that whole long video is finally off my hairy chest. I can end for now. Before I end, I'd like to remind you to like the video if you liked what you heard, or just like the white noise. That's fine. Comment your thoughts down below, whether you agree or disagree. At least keep it respectful. And subscribe and turn on notifications for more. All of that helps the channel, helps me feel better, and know that what I'm getting somewhere. I'm doing things right, even maybe not perfectly. Nobody's perfect, but we're getting close. And it's all about getting closer, right? There's your dad advice. It's not about being perfect. It's about getting close to perfect. Anyways, that's it for now. I'll hopefully see you in another video.